In the depths of history lies a haunting tale of unspeakable horror. The inhuman acts perpetrated against gay men during the Nazi era. Prepare to uncover the chilling reality of their unimaginable suffering as we delve into this dark chapter. How were gay men targeted and persecuted under the Nazi regime? What unspeakable cruelties did they endure? Were there any glimmers of resilience and resistance? Brace yourself for the shocking truths that await you. The answers to all of these haunting questions await you in this video. Early persecutions. Imagine, if you will, stepping into a time machine and journeying back to the early days of the Nazi regime in Germany. From the get-go, the Nazis were not friends to the LGBT+ community. Far from it, in fact. Their view of homosexuality was deeply prejudiced and flawed. They looked upon it not just as a personal lifestyle choice, but as a threat to the very survival of their so-called Aryan race. Why? Well, in their twisted logic, they believed that homosexuality was a roadblock to reproduction. Now, you might think, why would that be a problem? The answer lies in their warped ideology. The Nazis were big on racial purity and increasing the population of the Aryan race. They saw each heterosexual couple as a potential baby-making machine capable of producing more Aryan children. They thought of homosexuality as unnatural and unproductive. In their eyes, it wasn't just a matter of personal preference or identity, but a deviation from the norm. But it didn't stop there. The Nazis' hatred ran deeper. They viewed homosexuality as a sickness, a disease that could spread and infect the rest of society. Paragraph 175. Let's turn the pages of history back a bit, to a time before the Nazis took power in Germany. You see, even before their rule, there existed a law that put the gay community in a chokehold. It was known as Paragraph 175. Under this law, any sexual acts between men were considered illegal. But when the Nazis came into power, they took this already harsh law and made it even worse. They looked at Paragraph 175 not as a line in the sand, but as a tool they could use to further their hateful agenda. In 1935, they decided to revise this law, to broaden its scope and make it even more restrictive. You see, the Nazis had a knack for twisting words and definitions to suit their prejudices. They expanded the definition of illegal acts to include a wider range of behavior that they deemed lewd and lascivious. These were intentionally vague terms, designed to cover just about any interaction between men that the Nazis found objectionable. It was no longer just about sexual acts. Now, even a mere hint of affection or intimacy could be grounds for prosecution. Now, you might be wondering, how did they enforce such a vague law? Well, the answer is as chilling as it is unfair. The Nazis didn't require concrete evidence to persecute someone under Paragraph 175. All it took was suspicion, or an accusation. And the penalties were severe. Men who were convicted under Paragraph 175 often found themselves behind bars. But as if that wasn't bad enough, many of them were later transferred to concentration camps. Concentration camps. In these camps, gay men faced conditions that were beyond horrific. But it wasn't just the physical conditions that were brutal. The treatment they received from the SS guards was particularly harsh, even by the already low standards of the concentration camps. This was fueled by rampant homophobia within the ranks of the guards. The guards didn't just see them as prisoners, they saw them as less than human, as something to be despised and maltreated. To further degrade and stigmatize them, gay men were marked with a pink triangle. This was more than just a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of their so-called crime, a badge of their shame. It served to identify them, to separate them from the rest, and to make them targets for further abuse. In addition to the everyday nightmare that was life in the concentration camps, gay men were subjected to something even more insidious: pseudo-scientific medical experiments. The Nazis, in their twisted ideology, believed that they could cure homosexuality, and they were willing to go to great lengths to try and prove this. These experiments were not only deeply flawed from a scientific point of view, but they were also incredibly cruel. They involved procedures that can only be described as torture, both physical and psychological. There were forced sexual encounters with women, a horrific violation of these men's identity and consent. There were castrations and hormone injections, procedures carried out without concern for the victim's well-being or dignity. Doctors like Karl Vernet and Josef Mengele were infamous for their involvement in these inhumane procedures. Known for their callous disregard for human life and dignity, they carried out these so-called experiments on camp prisoners, often resulting in death, forced sterilization, and castration. Within the depths of the Nazi regime's twisted ideology, a dark and sinister plan was set in motion. They believed that gay men were carriers of what they deemed to be a hereditary disorder, and they were determined to eliminate it from their perceived Aryan race. To achieve this, they resorted to unimaginably cruel measures: compulsory sterilization and forced castration. Under the guise of their eugenics program, the Nazis forcibly sterilized some gay men. They believed that by rendering these individuals unable to procreate, they could prevent the supposed taint of homosexuality from being passed on to future generations. But the horrors did not stop there. Some men were subjected to something even more horrific: forced castration. This brutal procedure was carried out under the guise of being a cure for homosexuality. Can you imagine the pain, both physical and psychological, inflicted upon these individuals? It was a violation of their bodies, their identities, and their autonomy. The Nazis saw castration as a means to correct what they deemed to be a deviation from their narrow concept of normal. They believed that by forcibly removing the testicles of gay men, they could rid them of their supposed aberrant desires. It was a deliberate and systematic attack on their very essence, an attempt to erase their sexual orientation through horrific and irreversible means. These actions were not just acts of cruelty, but also acts of dehumanization. The Nazis reduced these individuals to mere objects, stripped of their dignity and autonomy. They treated them as nothing more than tools to further their warped vision of a racially pure society. Death marches and the final days. As the Allies inched closer, their vice tightening around the Nazi regime, a sense of panic and desperation consumed those in power. They knew their days were numbered, and in a last-ditch effort to maintain control, they forced prisoners, including gay men, on what came to be known as the death marches. These marches were a cruel and merciless ordeal, designed to keep the prisoners away from the approaching Allies. The death marches were relentless, grueling journeys that stretched for miles and miles. There was no respite, no mercy. The prisoners were driven forward at a relentless pace, their bodies pushed to the brink of collapse. Those who couldn't keep up, those who stumbled and fell, were met with swift and brutal punishment. On the spot, they were shot down, their lives extinguished in an instant. For those who managed to survive the endless trudging, the journey was still far from over. Many perished along the way, succumbing to exhaustion, starvation, and disease. Post-war legacy. After World War II, the horrendous Nazi treatment of gay men was mostly ignored. They weren't recognized as victims, and their sufferings were largely absent from the Nuremberg trials and post-war discussions. Worse still, their ordeal continued post-liberation. Sadly, due to the continued enforcement of paragraph 175 in West Germany, homosexuality remained illegal until 1969 and was not fully repealed until 1994. Years went by before the pain experienced by gay men during the Holocaust even got attention. Their tales, long hidden, only started coming out towards the end of the 20th century. Gradually, Germany began to confront this grim past. In 2002, the German government made an overdue apology to the gay community, acknowledging the harm done to them. In 2005, the European Parliament recognized the persecution of homosexuals during the Holocaust and included them in their discussions. It was a crucial step, signifying that the suffering of the gay community couldn't be ignored or forgotten anymore.